Well, good afternoon, viewers to MACFEST 2021. You are very welcome. I'm Barbara Dresner. I'm a member of the MACFEST team, and I'm delighted to welcome you to MACFEST 2021. This afternoon, we are thrilled to host our second exciting panel of the day, celebrating the Saga of Colours. I'm delighted to introduce you to our chief guest, Chris Fakarabani, who is joining us from New York, United States, where it is in the morning. Good morning, Chris. Let me say a few words to you about Chris, who is today's host. Chris Sacarabany has nearly 15 years of experience in intercultural and interfaith program management. He is a co-executive producer of the PBS award-winning documentary, Nobody Wants Us. That tells the story of Jewish refugees who escaped Nazi-invaded Europe and came to the United States in 1940. Prior to joining the Nobody Wants Us production team, Chris served as the executive director of the Foundation for Ethnic Understanding, a non-profit organisation dedicated to strengthening Muslim-Jewish relations globally. He also worked as a consultant at UNESCO and was a programme manager at the Foundation Homme de Parole, where he organised 3 world congresses of imams and rabbis for peace between 2005 and 2008. I'm very much looking forward to hearing from you, Chris. Over to you.
I'm online now. I can see you.
Good morning and greetings from New York. Thank you, Barbara, for your warm introduction. I am absolutely delighted to be with you today. And first of all, let me express my thank you to all the MACFEST team, and as well as my admiration to MACFEST founder Kaisra Sharaz. I've known Kaisra for the last 6 years when I was executive director of the Foundation for Ethnic Understanding, so working on strengthening Muslim-Jewish relations globally. And while partnering with Kaisra on various interfaith programs, I personally became a huge fan of her work in the UK and beyond. And so, if I remember correctly, at the end of 2017, when Kaisra shared with me a project to organize the Muslim Arts and Cultural Festival, the MACFEST, my reaction was immediately, wow, what an amazing and timely initiative to combat Islamophobia. And thus, at that time, I made sure that FFU was among the first co-sponsors. I love the idea of a festival bringing together Muslim and non-Muslim communities to promote social inclusion, break down barriers, fight Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, and all forms of extremism, and basically come together to celebrate similarities in differences. Bringing together Muslim communities, meaning showcasing the diversity in Islam and in Muslim communities, and also bringing non-Muslim people like me. I think that's a great way to engage with one another and to build bridges and friendship. And it's fascinating to me to see how this project has grown so fast, starting in Manchester to become an international festival that gather and engage with experts, educators, faith leaders, men, women, senior and young people. And so MACFEST has featured high-level speakers from around the world. A month ago, a world authority on contemporary Islam, Ambassador Akbar Ahmed, was a keynote speaker to one of the first MACFEST 2021 event. And he summarized the whole effort in one sentence: we must recognize our common humanity. And in this spirit, today, we are welcoming another outstanding keynote speaker, Dr. Zohor Idrissi. Dr. Idrissi has a PhD from London University, School of Oriental and African Studies. She's also a fellow of the Linnean Society. She has participated in many international conferences. She is a historian and author and has published a whole range of scholarly articles. She speaks and writes in Arabic, French, English, and Spanish. She has contributed to an OUP, Oxford Encyclopedia on Islamic Technology, and other academic printed works, in addition to many papers published on the internet. Her main themes are historical dietary methods of preserving health, the agricultural revolution in medieval Islam, the transmission of knowledge to Europe by the Islamic civilization, the historical development of Islamic agricultural techniques, and the introduction of new crops, to name a few. Dr. Zohor Idrissi will speak about an interesting universal topic in art and culture, something that brings human beings and community together, the use of color through centuries. She will also talk about the contribution of Islam in the use of color. Dr. Zohor, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chris. Okay, the Saga of Colours. I'll just say a few months ago, it didn't mean a thing to me until with the lockdown, I started looking around and I found that many French authors started to write books on colours and its effect on the European society. And that's how I embarked on this subject. And because of the invitation, I thought I better look at all the nation, the universal effect it had on the world. So we have to start from the ancient time. And I would say I would start from the Roman times, where the colors were very rare and expensive and not affordable for anyone outside the ruling class. For instance, kermes, which is a Quercus coccifera, which is a female oak tree beetle known in ancient Egypt and North Africa. It lives on this oak tree. So it was picked up and left to ferment to release a red dye that was appreciated but difficult to get. Indigo, which is a blue color, was also known but very expensive, as it has to come from the Silk Road, and the Silk Road is a journey of at least 2 years. So it was known in Asia, where it grew in limited quantities. The other color was woad, Isatis tinctoria, from the cabbage family. The ancient Britons called it glasto, and that's how we have Glastonbury in the UK, and we'll come back to it later on.
Sister Zohor, should we play the PowerPoint now?
No, not now. I'll give a sign to Brother Sulaiman.
That's fine.
Okay, so the Roman hated woad as the barbarians used to paint themselves with this blue dye before attacking the Romans. It was also regarded as a dye for the poor. So because of this historical event, the blue color was never in the Latin language or had a name until the 11th century, when it entered through the Arabic language, azur in Spanish, azraq. So it didn't exist in the Greek language either. There was no definite blue. The sea could be brown, honey, black. Even Aristotle, blue didn't figure in his rainbow studies. So when blue was required either in ancient Egypt, Greece, or Roman time, Lapis Lazuli, which is a semi-precious stone coming from Afghanistan, was used in powder form for painting. The common people used plants like nettle, birch, madder, fern, all very unstable because the technique of fixing the colors was not known yet. So colors faded in the sun, in the air, after the first wash, or none of them was bright anyway. The problem in ancient time was that of keeping the dye to last for a few days or few months, either for the rich or the poor. This is for the ancient time, the picture you have. Now we're going to enter the period of the 7th and the 8th, 9th century, which is the end of the Umayyad dynasty, that is Damascus, and the beginning of the Abbasid in Iraq. We have a famous writer, scientist, chemist called Jabir Ibn Hayen. He's originally from Yemen, but he was born in Syria and grew up and educated in Iraq. His father was a perfume maker, and he worked with his father in his shop. But he had another master mentor who was Imam Ja'far Sadiq, who collected and translated scientific books from ancient Egypt, Sumerians, the Indians, Persian, China, everywhere. So when the Abbasid dynasty established the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, Jabir ibn Hayyan was already mastering the new art on which he wrote several books. That was chemistry. He experimented methodically, recorded and invented a new norm of scales, measures, and quantified everything. This method guaranteed him success. His studies on metals allowed him to use them to impart colors to different substances. For instance, glass, he colored glass, and because of the Muslim craftsmen at that time, they already mastered and discovered the glass blowing technique. Jabir had attained 46 recipes for glass coloring. In his book, Kitab ad-Durra al-Maknuna, which is the book of the hidden pearl, he describes all the making of these colors in clay, in ceramics and glass. He imparted metallic ingredients to ceramics and glass, and with the glazing effect, we can start Sulaiman now showing some of the. So the result was fascinating in making tiles and decorative objects. Brother Sulaiman, you can put the first. So this is the result of Jabir ibn Hayyan's metallic chemistry into clay and the glazing. The result was tableware for the rich and the poor became colorful. Vibrant colors were available, and everyone had a real chromophilia that developed in the entire world. We can have all the slides now, brother. Jabir ibn Hayyan has identified cobalt for blue, as we see it, oxide, iron oxide, and this is Seville, the palace in Seville during the Almohad dynasty that was lost in 1265. So this decoration is before, I think it's about 900 years. So iron oxide gave green and brown, copper compound green and blue, lead compound yellow and red, carbon gave black. He invented new vocabulary. which we know today, all the oxides and the carbons and all the chemicals date from that time, the time of Jabir. Also, we have all the know-how, distillation, evaporation, sublimation, all the atomic philosophy from Aristotle was continued scientifically. He invented invisible ink. He invented luminous ink that you could see it only at night. He invented non-flammable textiles where at war people carrying incendiary devices do not burn. He invented waterproof garments and also gold-plated ornaments. And he had a lot of thieves after him. So it was a real chromophilia that was invented by Jabir. He has transformed and enriched the color vision of mankind forever. From the dull and ruddy earth hue to the white of vibrancy surrounding mosques, palaces, fountains, and mausoleums. He wrote on music, on astronomy, math, nature, medicine, poison. He spent 75 years on experiments as he entered his father's workshop at 15 and died at 93. He died in his lab, surrounded by his student. He left 112 books, and his work was known all over the world, from Asia to Africa and Europe. And all the known chemists refer to him, from Lavoisier, Richard Kochman, Sarton, etc. The other fundamental event in the Saga of Colours, besides Jabir's mineral invention, was the action of Muslim agronomers who thrived in producing vegetable colors, especially blue, which was not known previously or made available. Their concentration on producing indigo, Nila, as it is called in Asia and throughout the Middle Ages, had a universally admired color, whereas before only woad was known across the world, giving a fading bluish, pinkish color. The advent of the Islamic agricultural revolution, which used unheard of technique to improve the soil with fertilizers and artificial irrigation, the latter brought water wherever it was needed. The two components allowed countries to select and invest in any cash crop. One of them was sappan wood, given a pink and red dye, and it came from Java, Indonesia, Malaysia. And we come back to this interesting tree. This wood was crushed into powder form for easy transport anywhere in the world. The second ingredient was indigo, Nila. Other plants of lesser importance were cultivated on a large scale too, like madder for carpet weavers and embroidery. For instance, in the Deccan Valley in India, the 3 months monsoon and 9 months of drought ceased because stairwell cisterns and reservoirs were excavated to retain water for artificial irrigation. In this same manner, in Africa, new crops and technical know-how allowed the plantation of 7,000 square kilometers of indigo from sub-Saharan region to Kano in Nigeria. Dye pits were the basis of the wealth of the Yoruba and Hausa alike, competing for the best product. The Tuareg dyed themselves with indigo for sun protection and also against the insect, and they roamed the desert transporting this valuable dye. In Mali, the Mandrinka area was also famous not only for dyeing pits, but also for making special inks for the 25,000 scribes who were copying and illustrating books for the rest of the Muslim world. Timbuktu, which because of its cotton plantations, produced the finest paper in Africa. Indigo and cotton were Africans' cash crops for many years, until the 19th century brought competition from synthetic dyes from Europe. Talking about Japan. Japan had indigo, we know, from the Silk Road in the 7th and 8th century, but it wasn't widely planted. So kimonos were decorative for the layman, only. But after the 17th century, sorry, I'm mixed up here, the layman could not have any dye, but just a little bit of indigo or black. But the rich colors were for the Tokugawa shoguns, who were the top of the samurai class, military and political elite. And the farmers and the artisan and even the merchants, they were not allowed any colors at all. And that regulation was for a class distinction. So the rich merchant ability to buy luxurious, colorful clothing, they were not allowed because of the law that was maintained against them until the Meiji Restoration. That was until the 1868, which abolished the office of the shogun military head state. And the linen was the main fabric for making kimono. And the silk industry did not develop until the 16th century. And as I said, it was only for the rich, because the sanctuary regulations did not allow the bulk of the population to wear any colors. When the Restoration in the 19th century, the Japanese people were allowed colors, but they were even allowed Western clothes. For China, the Chinese, during the 6 dynasties, which is about the 6th century, they tried with the colors, but the raw lead was only used for funerary jars because it was toxic and they didn't know how to improve it. So it was during, there were no colors except what we explained, the luxury and the expensive colors, until the 13th century. It was during the Yuan dynasty, 1271-1368, which was under the Mongol, that artists were brought from neighboring Muslim countries, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, and Iran, that ceramics saw profound development in the blue and white porcelain based on Jabir's technique, cobalt. With underglazing painting, it became a sought-after ceramics. Later on, during the Ming dynasty, 1368-1644, Emperor Yongle, that means he ruled until 1425, under the influence of Zheng He, the Muslim explorer navigator, brought a new technique from, again, the Muslims, a new kilns technique, and I mean building the oven, the kilns, an innovation in ceramic manufacturing with mineral colorings such as manganese, copper, cobalt, and glazing was embellishing the Chinese ceramic that was to become known internationally. For the rest of the colors, silk was restricted. They had the same regulations in China so that people would not exploit nature for using natural semi-precious stones, whatever. So only the rich could use decorative silk garment, but the rest of the population, they had to wait until the 17th century, 18th century with the European synthetic colors. Now we move to Europe. In France, under the Carolingian court, that means Charlemagne, the emperor and his entourage never wore blue, which is woad, only red, white, and purple, until the 12th century, where the Blue Revolution occurred. Indigo was penetrating Northern Europe. Even the Virgin Mary was painted in blue. The king of the Franks, Philip Augustus, 1180-1190, became the first king of France, the inventor of the French nation, was wearing his fascinating blue color for his coronation, and actually it became the main color for the French king's coat of arms. That's something unheard of and unbelievable. Never thought that the Franks would wear blue. King Henry III, 1230-1250, followed suit, just like the Germans and the Italian, a fact that was unthinkable before. So the 12th century Europe was a period of bright colors. According to the architect Viollet-le-Duc, the 19th century architect, he was a restorer of ancient monuments. He described the difference of workmanship in the 12th and 13th century cathedrals murals. He noticed that the laws of optics were undoubtedly implemented, and one can see the difference between the two centuries, i.e. the 12th and the 13th century. The improvement in the usage of cobalt is noticeable. The colors were created and they were treated scientifically, where the red became stronger than orange and the blue transmitted more light than the unblemished blue before, because it had no patina. And this is, patina is a green film that is left by copper and acid. This is due to advances in Jabir's work by Muslim chemists in Spain. Al-Marrakushi, his work are in the French National Library, reveals progress in chemistry where it became a subject of its own. Added to the fact that cobalt was made by sintering, i.e. high temperature without melting, as oxide aluminium. This is due to hydraulic power carried out to activate continually the bellows for this task. Hence, up to the beginning of the 13th century, southern France had the benefit of the world of colors until Cardinal Lothair, who is Innocent III, started his crusade against Muslim Spain by cutting off all economic links. The church forbid anyone to dress like a peacock, he called it. The Pope had supremacy over all Europe's kings and nobility. Hence, back to woad production and other dull vegetable dyes. The Venetians and the Genoans were bringing expensive dyes from Constantinople for painters and dyeing textiles for the royalties at a cost. In England, woad was carried on in Glastonbury, and the production was disparaged as the whole area would smell of urine, because urine was used as a fixing element, because the colors would not penetrate the textile unless vinegar or urine, and we couldn't afford vinegar in those days, so urine was the only affordable chemical to use. Furthermore, it took up the space of most fertile land. Fertile land was wasted in producing woad, and because of the threat to famine, Queen Elizabeth I made a proclamation in October 1585, banning woad in fertile land and also near her palaces. The Spaniards, because of the ban from the church, started to look in Latin America, where they found the Aztec using cochinella fly to obtain the red dye. That stayed in the monopoly until modern time. The Portuguese traveled to India, where they discovered indigo, and they are those who called it indigo because before it was called Nila, as we saw in the 12th, 13th century manuscript in Europe, it was called Nila. So the Portuguese, they have known, I mean, they didn't know indigo because they were not in Portugal in those days, and they haven't seen it. So when they went to India, they saw in Mumbai, Dungari, people working at sea wearing this fascinating color. So they brought it with them, and they brought the red dye we talked about earlier that came in powder from Java, Indonesia, the sapan species. And they planted it in America. And this plant was planted in Veracruz, which is the true cross. Veracruz was the name of Brazil. And Brazil was named after this dye, after this tree that produced Brazilian, and it was planted all over Brazil, and it derived, no doubt, a lot of money for the Portuguese. So as a result, Veracruz was scrapped for the name of Brazil, and the country became Brazil, named after this tree. So France and Germany controlled woad trade in Europe because they had a lot of land, and they sold woad because that's the only color they could replace the blue. England finally discovered indigo through the Portuguese and planted it in India, discovered it, planted it, used the fertilizers and expanded it all over India. And that was a fierce competition between the European nations in the 17th century. Italy in the 15th century became mad about the black color. And black color was again in the portfolio of Jabir Ibn Hayen because the Abbasid rulers were black, as it is still today amongst the Iranian and I think other Muslim people in the Middle East. So the Venetians and the brought this black color to the court of Milan, and it became the color by excellence. It's a new black, a vibrant black that the court of Milan was attracted to, and the French kings followed suit, and the Spanish court, the Spanish kings were wearing it for 200 years until the 17th century. So the rich were not allowed to wear black, although they can afford it. The ban on the rich people was until the 17th century. So as a result, we have two anecdotes. we have Arnolfini couple, and I hope that one day the art critic would correct that, because we have several paintings of this couple in different colors, and they always show them as a bride and groom, which is not the case because they were quite advanced in age. And that is because they were not allowed to wear colors, so they called artists, and they had themselves painted, at least in paint, rather than wear colors and go outside. The other anecdote is a rich German banker, Matteo Schwarz. He lived in 1520, 1560. He made for himself 137 portraits. They're all at the French National Library. He painted himself wearing black because he was not allowed to wear black. It was only for the royalties. And he was not happy with that. So he made all this painting of himself in different outfits, but all in black because of this ban. The historian, the French historian, one of them said that there were no colors in our villages until 1850. And it's only when synthetic colors were made available to people that colors started to be seen. The other important element is the printing. Printing and making portraits and artists. The artists were very limited in colors and paint especially, because only tempera, not tempura, my favorite Japanese dish, tempera paint was made of egg yolk. And the moment the artist finished, it started to crack, and it wasn't a reliable paint. So the Venetians started bringing paint from the Middle East, and especially these paint were made of chemicals, obviously, but also they had a base of Arabic gum, antimony, linseed oil, and lavender oil made from essential oil distillation. And the result was phenomenal. And we see after the period of, from Da Vinci onward, all the painting were of bright colors. The Protestant movement were wearing black because they were critical of the Catholic wearing colors, and they went for black and asked people to be more sober and more serious wearing black. But also because of this black ink, they encouraged printing. And the printing industry, I think it's not the machine that has helped. The discovery of ink, that was the revolution, and not in the machine, because people were making letters or any scenes in blocks, wooden blocks. And that date from ancient Egypt and the Roman time and so on. But it is the ink that made the revolution. So the Protestant movement used that as a purpose for letting people know about their movement and printing manuscripts and distributing them, and white paper for the first time, because before there was no cotton because of the colors. Cotton was not allowed in as well. So just rags were used for making paper, which is not that clear, or white. So now the Venetians were bringing white paper. So can you imagine shiny black ink printed on white, so that people were more fascinated by the black and white than what the content is. So this is one of the successes of the Protestant movement. And also there were for the first time, we had the printed Bible in 49 copies. Sorry, I'm just saying what I'm saying here. So we talked about the restriction rules that forbade anyone to wear colours. And in England, Queen Elizabeth didn't allow anyone to wear purple except for the royalty and the royal family until 1856. I think that's the saga until today.
Thank you, Dr. Zohor. Barbara, do you want to have a check if there's any questions to ask?
Yes, we did have a very interesting question. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, yes, carry on. Yes.
So this is the question, I'm just looking for the person's name. I think it's Shabana. She says she's wondering if there is any information on colours and the impact on individuals due to history. For example, when I'm in certain countries seeing this colour and image, I often feel like I've been there before. Is it possible that it is in my DNA? Wonderful question.
Well, I mean, when we talk about colours, it doesn't mean that we didn't see them at all. We saw them in nature.
Of course.
We knew about colour. I mean, the eye saw colours, but it's just copying them, putting them on you. And, you know, at times when you walk into a gathering and you see people all wearing black, you know that they're in mourning or there's something very summoned going on. And so the colors, they communicate, they tell you, and what you wear in winter is not what you wear in the summer. For instance, in Muslim Spain, there was a code of colors where people wore green in springtime, yellow in summer, darkish orange, brown in winter. But I think that is to go with nature. Today, I find it, I mean, we find it very difficult to dress in pink and go in the middle of winter in the streets of London. You won't accept it because that doesn't go with the surrounding, with the environment. But for somebody coming from Africa, it's a normal because that's the way he dressed every day in his beautiful outfit with the beautiful weather they have. So in a way, but I'm
Oh, we seem to have frozen. Is there something we can do about that?
Sister Zohor, can you hear us?
Can Suleiman help us?
I think she's going to join on another one.
Oh, good.
okay, we're back now.
Oh, thank you. So you're really saying that culture and location affects the colours we use?
Light. Yeah, light, I think light affects us. Light affects us. And it's something psychological. And, you know, at times you say, I'm not in the mood of wearing this or that. So definitely the colors affect the mood as well as the feeling and the joy, and it has some effect on the brain, definite.
Because there are different colours worn in different countries for ceremonies such as funerals.
Well, that's something recent. I mean, as I said, the black people before in England, they wore purple for funerals.
Aha.
And then change. It's all a matter of, I think, availability and how our lives are changing now with the you know, the material side of our culture. We have things easy and we can dress, but now it became the norm that black is for funeral, but also it's for solemn gathering, people visiting bankers or having an important meeting, or it has this sort of reference to being serious and sober.
Yes. And then I think, am I right in, was it in Thailand that I saw people wearing white to a funeral?
That's quite interesting what you're saying.
I think it was Thailand.
But let me tell you, in North Africa, the widow wears white during the day, and that's a very interesting code. And it's not in the Middle East, it's just in North Africa. The widow wears white, all white, and she's allowed to go out during the day, but she must come back to her house before dusk, because there is a negative and positive side to white. So during the day, it's negative, and that's why the widow wears it, so that everyone knows that that woman just recently lost her husband, and she wears that for 4 months and 10 days, I think. And after that, she doesn't wear it anymore. Funny enough, the French queens of the 12th and 13th century, where their husbands died, they wore white, just like the Muslim. And they were called les reines blanches, the white queens. But they were white all their life, for the rest of their lives. That's a sign of mourning.
Thank you. Sister, I wanted to ask you, I went on a trip as a writer to Peru, and they showed us about dyes and colors, and they picked up the colors from plants and from insects, and that's where they got their colors from. So the origin of colors, I suppose, depends on where you are, what's available. Can you expand a little bit on that, the use of small insects? Do you know?
Yeah, as I said, I mentioned 2 insects, one during the Roman time, and there's a mollusk as well during the Phoenicians. That's why they're called the Phoenicians, which is the red dye. And apparently until today, we don't know what sort of mollusk they used. It's a secret. And this was the dye, the red dye, that the Roman and the ancient were mad about. Then we have the cuchilla, it's called the Spanish fly, and they got it from the Aztec. And this fly was a dye that the Spaniard never revealed the origin of this fly until, I think, the 19th century. And the Aztec and I think Latin American, they still dye their wool and make beautiful jumpers with this dye. And we have, during the Roman time, we have the female fly, I don't have the name here, I mentioned it earlier, that lived in the oak trees. And it's the female fly that was soaked in water, and it gave this beautiful purple dye.
That's amazing. That's amazing. We have got a few more questions. Thank you very much for those answers. This one is from Hajra, who says, what was the first colour on earth?
I would say there was one color.
Yes.
Which is a color that had all the spectrum of all the colors, all the 7.
Yes.
That's how it is, I would say, Islamic philosophy. And that was a very, very advanced or popular in the 12th century, where the Muslim scholars started deciphering and looking into colors and finding, and I found some references in European manuscript where they were looking into it as well. And finally, you had Cistercians, and you have Suger, who was building his cathedrals, fighting against Peter the Venerable, whether light is material or not. Do we need to dress the house of God with material or with something spiritual, which is the light that everyone was looking for, which is bringing light into God's house?
Yes.
And that it's one direction, but in it there are the 7 colors we know in the rainbow today.
Yes, yes. Thank you. Then we've got another question from Jane, who says, are there any other obvious linguistic differences about colours, like there being no colour for what she's put, barbarian blue?
The word was, we call it barbarian blue, but it's a beautiful dye. It's what we call pastel in French. It's from pinkish bluish. It depends how long you macerated the word in urine that gives you all the strengths, and how you cared by not putting it in the sun or whatever. But the barbarian, apparently, they found it beautiful in those days, and the bride had to be colored in this color, in world color, to see that's how they saw her beautiful, when she's dyed in this, with this color. And it is, I think, very dark, very green, maybe. And that's what was putting off the Romans, because they couldn't imagine. Even at times I read something that didn't like blue eyes because you reminded them of the color as well. But there are a lot of Romans with blue eyes anyway.
Oh, thank you. Now I've got another question from somebody called Anonymous, who says, I've noticed, for example, in West Africa, the traditional clothing patterns are very colourful compared to traditional, in quotes, European clothing, if there is such a thing. In South Asia, the traditional colour for bridal dress is red compared to the traditional white used in the West. Is there a possibility that different skin tones influence our choice of colours in clothing?
Yes and no. The European wedding dress was red, was not white, it was red. And as I said about white being negative and positive, during the day it's a negative color because it's bright and it's noticeable. Whereas at night, when darkness settles, it becomes a positive color where the person wearing it is more beautiful, more attractive, and so on. But the color skin as well, I think in India, white is for mourning because that's a negative color, and red is, it doesn't reflect the color of the skin as the white does. But for instance, we didn't talk about the rainbow and the study. The Muslims studied the rainbow and the colors of the rainbows. After Aristotle, there were about 4 or 5 colors, but there was no blue amongst them. And then we have grosse tête. We have, you know, scholars in England, for instance, and the Latinists. They were describing the rainbow, but the colors were not fixed yet until, you know, in Europe, much later, 17th century. Then you have to study Goethe, you have to study Newton and so on. But the Muslims, they were already finding out about the color scheme of the rainbow.
Yeah.
As I said, the colors, they all, for each area, they have their negative and their positive connotation. But you know, in Europe, because of the rain, because of the color of the sky and so on, we keep using grayish, darkish colors because it goes well, maybe with the mud, maybe with the rain, maybe with the, you know, and when you're inside, I think you can wear brighter colors if you want to, but outside, I don't think we agree wearing bright colors, and it goes also with the color of the sky.
Yes, it is interesting that grey is in fashion at the moment, isn't it?
Well, it was very fashionable in Italy in the 16th century because it wasn't black, it wasn't white, it wasn't red, because red was very expensive and the church was against it. There are a lot of, I mean, women were dressing in black, in red, to show that they had money. And there are some notary manuscripts where women left their beautiful red dress for such and such person, or when they got married, it was in their dowry because of the color was so expensive and red was so rare. So Europe, I would say it went through different stages in colors. But we take everything for granted during the last 100, 150 years,
yes,
all these colors. And
so we've got another question that goes back in time a bit more, and this is about the anonymous questioner says, I would love to learn more about the pigments used to make the colors in manuscripts.
well, I think you know, it's a difficult question. It's a technical question for me.
Yes.
But the inks, they were secrets. But as you know, going to libraries and visiting, you know, international libraries where France, England, or even in Morocco, when we have a manuscript, at times you see that the weed, not the weed, the larva has eaten the paper, but not the ink.
Oh, right.
Because the ink was treated with essential oil. And it is a repellent for these worms to go and eat the ink. So at times you have threads of, you know, the worms eating the paper, but not the ink, and the ink stays like filament. And that, you know, these are secrets of, for instance, gold. They used, we have beautiful manuscript dating, I think 1,000 years old. And the gold, maybe it's Jabir because he made liquid paint gold. And they used saffron to preserve the gold in the ink, so that the manuscript doesn't fade and the gold is so pure after so many centuries.
That's amazing. Is that why saffron is treasured so much?
It is, yes, yeah, in those days too, yeah.
Yes. So another anonymous question here is, do you have any insights from your knowledge of the history of colours into the way humans perceive colours? Why can everyone recognise the colour blue as blue? Well, listen, I've got to add something there, because not everybody does see colours the same way, do they?
Well, I think, you know, there are people who are Daltonian, as they call them. They can't see orange or yellow.
Oh, yes.
And yeah, you know, I think that they're more for psychologists than for people like me. And I just see that we're all affected by colors. Women maybe more than men. But I think it's a matter of education as well. And
but there must be something in our physical makeup, because I recall being asked to fetch somebody their blue shirt, and I knew which shirt they meant, but I thought it was green. So green and blue, it was a turquoisey. It was one of those in between. Do you know what I mean?
Well, I mean, we have hues now. Yes, yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
there are a lot of hues and colors, and
Yeah.
you know, it goes into hundreds of thousands today.
Indeed.
And everything is done by computer today. You know, we
Yes.
don't mix any colors; it's just what the computer gives you. And so we live in a different.
Yes.
It's not the world that existed before, but
yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. So I've got another question from Munira, and she says, my comment and observation about the people who live in is about people who live in rural areas, villages, etc. They usually wear very colourful, bright floral colours that reflect their closeness to nature, whilst in cities they tend to like more neutral colours. Do you have any ideas or comments on that? Thank you, she says. Or he, yes, she says.
Well, I mean, the thing I would recommend, it's something I studied in Spanish literature, which is Garcia Lorca, and we can find it in English translation as well, where it's a poem called La Monja Gitana, the nun, the gypsy nun, where she was converted to Christianity, and she was brought to the church, and the women were gathering there making a mantle embroidery, and she came with bright colors, which was shocking for the rest of the people, because she was conveying her emotions. She comes from nature, and for her, dressing the church with these colorful flowers embroidered was shocking to the others, because they wanted to go for simplicity. So it all depends where you live and the effect you had and your upbringing and the emotions as well.
Indeed, indeed. Well, we're reaching our last question, and thank you so much for answering all the other ones. It's been such a fascinating session. I wish we had more time. So this is a great question from my colleague Hanan. She says, what is the closest colour to the meaning of truth?
I think the color of your heart. I would just go, they say clear as white, clear as water. Water doesn't have any color. And I think I just stick to light. Light, that's the symbol of knowledge, the symbol of illumination, the symbol of clearing your heart from any hatred or any ill thoughts. That's what I think of, which is, you know, differs from one person to the other.
Absolutely. The human imagination has a lot to do with this.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay.
Thank you, Barbara. Okay, so thank you so much, Sister Zohor.
You're
for an
welcome.
amazing historical journey about the origins of colors, their uses, and oh gosh, I'm lost for word. It's been an amazing journey.
Thank
And
you.
all the questions and your answers have added far more as well to that journey, mashallah. It was
You're welcome.
absolutely riveting. Thank you also to Chris from New York, a personal, very good colleague and a friend, for joining us from there and for your lovely introduction. Thank you to our MACFEST team, in particular to Barbara today for asking questions and for introducing our special guests. And of course, the technical house behind the scenes, Suleiman, Mariam and Hajra and the rest of the team. And if you're able to join us tomorrow, I know it sounds, oh gosh, here she goes again. Tomorrow we have an international youth panel with amazing 6 young people from America from one end, all the way Philippines at the other end, talking about Islamophobia, life during the pandemic, and racism and the Black Lives Matter. And that's at 2 o'clock. And if you love books, literature, we've got another treat for you on Tuesday. And that's with 2 women, one from Afghanistan and one from South Africa, sharing their world about books and book selling, etc. And then I also have in the audience here, Sister Munira Al-Susa, who just asked a question. She's got a session in March about Ibn Khaldun, he famous philosopher, writer, traveler, and that's going to be riveting. So for the moment, please, everybody, thank you so much, all our attendees, for joining us. Have a wonderful weekend, and goodbye for now, and assalamu alaikum.
Thank you very much for having me. Assalamu.
Thank you all.